Today, I'm going to talk about what's going on in Israel. In particular, I think there's been a change of tone from the leadership level in this country regarding what's happening in Israel. The status quo for much of the last year or last few years has been the mainstream media, especially on the conservative side, has been very much go hung, cheerleading Israel along as if Israel can do no wrong, as if whatever happens in Gaza or Hezbollah, all those groups and places, that it's all justified because we have to support Israel no matter what. I think that's starting to change, and that's why I chose this topic for today. I will get right to screen sharing. I have a couple of articles that illustrate what I'm talking about. So share and share. Okay. So what I have here is this is the alexjoneslive.com. It's funny, I talk a lot about Google and AI and search engines on this show, on this podcast, because I feel like finding the articles that tell the truth or what we believe to be closer to the truth, it's still challenging. I feel like it's better than it's been in years past, but it's still challenging. I am looking at alexjoneslive.com. Of course, he used to be InfoWars. There's a long story to how that change came to be. But in any case, this is the story I was looking for. So, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, says Israeli settlers are, quote unquote, terrorists who have committed, quote unquote, horrific violence in the West Bank. Dozens of Israeli men have been throwing stones at settlers in Palestine this week. The reason I noted this article is because it shows a real change in tone from Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, of course, former presidential candidate, current U.S. ambassador to Israel. He has been a staunch supporter. See, it sounds like I'm reading from the article, which I kind of am, but I'm kind of not. This is just what everybody knows. He has been a staunch supporter of the conflict with Israel from the start, ever since October 7th, and probably before that. And now he's starting to use language that is closer to what the critics have been saying about, atrocities going on, horrific things going on at the hands of Israelis over there. So this notion that Israel can do no wrong, that it's all just uncompromised support for Israel, I feel like that's starting to shift, and it's starting to shift at levels that I have not seen. When I first told one of my friends, my restaurant family, I jokingly call them people I work with at one of my many day jobs. They're all some of them are very political, and we talk a lot about this stuff. And he could not, the chef there could not believe when I told him that Mike Huckabee was saying some of the things that he's been saying. So let's read some of the article. Huckabee, a staunch supporter of Israel and an open Zionist, said this week that some Israeli settlers committed, quote unquote, a horrific act of terror, end quote, by sieging a home belonging to an American citizen in Palestine. They quote NPR. A group that has included up to dozens of men has thrown stones, attempting to bring down a stone wall nearby and preventing the occupants from leaving despite dwindling supplies. Speaking to the AP by phone from his home in Ohio, the home's owner, Lo Riety, I'm probably saying that wrong, said his 48-year-old brother and nephew, who have been holed up in the home to defend it, have been unable to leave the house and did not have access to food or water for several days. Well, props to NPR for reporting that. I believe NPR. I'll be honest, I don't check them very often. I haven't been a huge fan of NPR over the years, but kudos for them for reporting some of what's going on over there. I'll continue. Palestinian Christian activist Ihab Hassan claimed the U.S. Embassy in Israel and Ambassador Huckabee never condemned the heinous acts on Wednesday. That is true. Huckabee, up until recently, has not been a tough critic, but he has. So let me go to another article here. When I searched on Google for this story. I looked pages and pages and pages. I could not find it. I could not find this story. I finally had to go directly to the alternative media, in this case, alexjones.com, and search directly on their website to find the article that you were just looking at. This is what came up when I looked for the same article on Google using the same words in the search engine. This is from about a year ago. So this is old news, but I'm sharing it anyway just to illustrate a point. U.S. envoy, so this is trtworld.com. U.S. envoy cast Gaza genocide as, quote, spiritual conflict, urging Christian solidarity with Israel. So, total different tone here. Again, this article is about a year old. It's from 2025. Mike Huckabee frames Israelis' assault on Gaza not in a political, legal, or rights terms, but as a biblical struggle of heaven versus hell, exposing deep ideological bias driving Washington's support despite mass Palestinian deaths. Excuse me. Here's a picture that looks like some atrocities going on. I assume that's in the subtext to here. It says, or the caption rather, it reads, Israel has already killed more than 64,200 Palestinians in Gaza since October 2023. Again, this is an article from September 5, 2025. So if you were to do the math and account for the almost a year since then, we're probably talking more deaths than that. And this article, it's a whole different tone. Huckabee has recast Israel's devastating war. That's my dog playing with a toy. Devastating war in Gaza, which has killed tens of thousands of Palestinians and is under investigation for genocide, as a quote unquote spiritual conflict between good and evil. In an interview with CBN News on Thursday, Huckabee urged Christians worldwide to rally behind Israel, highlighting how religious ideology continues to shape U.S. political backing for Tel Aviv, even in the face of mounting international outrage over Israeli war crimes and genocide charges in Gaza. I wrote an article for thebridge.com based out of Montpelier, Vermont. It's one of the few writing gigs that I've had, and over the past year, I write part-time now. I used to be a full-time news journalist in Vermont. And the article was about a group called Bread and Puppet Theater here in Vermont. Anybody in or around Vermont probably knows of this group. They've been around for decades. One of the founders of the group has worked tirelessly over the last few years to work on a documentary detailing genocide and crimes against humanity in Gaza. And I wrote that article, and I did not bring it up for the screen sharing. I'm not going to look for it right now, but I encourage people, if you look up thebridge.com and look up Israel and Gaza, you will probably find it quite easily. Or Bread and Puppet, you will find it quite easily. I learned by doing that article that just really terrible things are happening over there. I don't think I need to recite it all. If you're a listener to this podcast, if you read alternative media, not just mainstream media, you have probably heard a lot about horrible things happening over there. I'm going to go to another article now. This one is Al Jazeera. Again, I had to go to foreign news to get this headline. This is not something I could find easily in U.S. news. This one says hospital workers wounded in Israeli drone attack on Gaza's Kamal Adwan. Palestinian Health Ministry describes attack as part of Israel's systematic targeting of health facilities. I pulled up this article specifically. It's about drone attacks in Israel in hospitals. Think about that for a second. Now, I learned about this by listening to the Tucker Carlson show. He had a guest on. I don't remember the guest off the top of my head, but the guest was talking about drone attacks occurring in Israel in hospitals. Essentially, the drone flown by somebody, obviously, offsite. These drones have, video cameras on them, I suppose, and they're flown with controllers or whatever, probably like a video game controller or an Xbox or a PlayStation controller. And they're flown in and they commit presumably assassinations against people that are targets of interest, i.e., terrorist suspect, etc. That's the premise of it all. Um, I would hope that most of you have more skepticism, and I'm sure you do. That's probably not the case. People getting shot in a hospital bed or during a surgery, stories like that, horrible, horrible events. Again, I encourage people to listen to Tucker Carlson's show, and because he covers a lot about Israel. And I have another one here. He talks a lot about atrocities happening in Israel, and I'm really glad that Mike Huckabee is getting onto this. This is an AI response to a story about this is about an interview very recently on the Tucker Carlson show. I could not find a good article for this, but I did find this AI response at the top. I listened to this episode of the Tucker Carlson show just a few days ago, so it's fresh on my mind, and I wanted to bring it up. Kamel Masalet, I'm probably saying that wrong, appeared on the Tucker Carlson show to discuss the killing of his 20-year-old son, Safullah Kamel Masalet, an American citizen who was beaten to death by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. The incident, Safullah, a Tampa, Florida resident, recently visited family, was killed in the West Bank. So Americans own property apparently in the West Bank. Who knew? In any case, Israeli settlers have been moving in, and they're supposed to, well, the whole notion of settlers to me seems like a foreign concept in the modern world, because everywhere in the world is settled. And even if you're settling a land that is quote unquote unoccupied, which this is not obviously the case, but even in the best case scenario, you still need like zoning permits. You need permission essentially from the government that rules over that land to get the green light to settle area. This is settlers. That's what I think of when I hear the term. When I think of settlers, I think of like not ancient times, but like hundreds of years ago when there were still large swaths of the world. The Western expansion in the United States comes to mind. So the whole notion of settlers at all from Israel going into the West Bank in this case, it spells trouble in my mind, because if you think of the idea of a settler, you're going to go and settle land. You're not buying land, you're not purchasing land, you're settling it. You're going to go plant your flag, build your house, pour the pavement, pour the concrete, do the landscaping, the construction, or maybe in this case you're simply going to occupy and or attack existing people. So I'm going to get away from the screen sharing now and get back to talking about this. So having a little bit of stop sharing. Okay. All right. So there's me again. There's my house. I'm using a different camera this time, courtesy of DC over in England. He sent me one. It's got a little bit of a fisheye effect to it. I like it. It's higher definition. It actually forced me to shave a little bit, not enough before this broadcast. But I'm going to read a little bit more from all this. So essentially, and I encourage people to look it up. If you have Spotify, you can listen to Tucker Carlson. It's almost certainly on YouTube. The title of the show, the episode, is Whistleblower: Americans Are Being Murdered While Trump Does Nothing and the Media Cover-Up Grows. This was a very recent episode on the Tucker Carlson show, and I listened to the whole thing. It was about 2 hours long. A family out of Florida, they own an ice cream shop. They own land apparently in the West Bank. The 20-year-old son tried to go back to their home to visit family in the West Bank. He was murdered. He was murdered by unruly, I guess you would call them mobs or violent crowds of Israeli extremists who I guess they believe this is their land. I don't know what they believe. The whole Greater Israel Project and the mentality behind it, I can't explain it all, but it seems to be going very badly and wrongly, and that's why, again, I'm reporting on all this. I sympathize. When I was younger and I knew less about geopolitics, knew less about what was going on, if you had asked me about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, I would have said something along the lines of, this is 1,000 years old conflict where both sides are arguing over whose God is bigger. My God's bigger than your God. And I would sort of perhaps somewhat ignorantly say both sides just need to get over it. And I still believe some of that sentiment today, but clearly Israel is the aggressor in these latest stories. Gaza, yes, October 7th happened. I believe there's a lot to the October 7th narrative that is still not clear. How was that allowed to happen? Was there any shenanigans or cooperation going on? My mentor in journalism, Webster Griffin Tarpley, once he's still around. He's based out of Washington D.C. He once told me he would always say on his radio show, "Cui bono." I'm probably saying that wrong. I think that's Latin for who benefits. And I try to look at every news story from the angle who benefits, who wins who gets the net. If you take all the cause and effect of the story down to a raw base level, who wins, who benefits from this outcome. October 7th, let's just assume the entire narrative is true. They were a surprise attack. They had no idea it was coming. It was horrible and terrible, and all these Israelis were killed, and there was no cooperation and or instigation or whatever by the Israeli side. Let's just give the benefit of the doubt that the entire official mainstream narrative is all true. From a who benefits perspective, Israel has just run rampant over the West Bank, and now they're going into Lebanon, and it feels a lot in a lot of ways like 9/11, which has its own set of question marks as far as that whole narrative and what really happened that day. And by the way, Israel, if you do look at the conspiracy surrounding 9/11 and who may have had a hand in it, Israel comes up time and time again. We could spend easily a whole episode just on that, but I'm already diverging a little bit here. It seems like since October 7th, unquestionably, Israel and or its settlers and or its military have been definitely the aggressor on the offensive, committing the atrocities. I'm not saying bad things never happen to Israelis. I know that they do, but it seems like proportionately, if you look up the numbers online from like bipartisan international groups, the casualties are overwhelmingly on the Palestinian side, not the Israeli side. Nearly all the casualties on the Israeli side are from October 7th, and everything afterwards by many times more. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Many times more people have died on the Palestinian side, and now you've got people in Lebanon dying as well. So again, to tie this back to the beginning of this podcast, this is about, I believe the tide is turning on the public opinion level. Well, the public opinion against Israel has been very poor for a while now, but as the founder of Breitbart News used to say, as goes the public opinion or culture, as goes politics. I believe this could be an example of that. As public sentiment around the world, not just in America, turns more and more sharply against Israel and what's going on over there, the powers that be are seeing the writing on the wall. So Mike Huckabee, a year ago, as reported by the TRT World article, was very much saying it's a spiritual conflict and we need to support Israel at all costs. Just a year later, is now saying horrific act of terror by these Israeli settlers. And he's not talking about the specific incident with the son and the family from, I mean, I hope that he is to some extent, but he's generally talking about what's going on in Palestine and with these Israeli settlers. So I think there's a change of tone. And when the top levels in government start to turn, something's going on. And I would just conclude this podcast with this thought. When I was younger, in my 20s, when I first started doing journalism, it was a very different playing board, so to speak. It was a very different atrocities, I believe, could be gotten away with much more easily than they can today. And the reason I say that is the internet, social media, and the loosening of control of social media, largely by, I believe, Elon Musk buying X, formerly Twitter. And that's pressured, I believe. I would like to believe that's what's pressured other outlets. YouTube now, I think, is a lot more open than it used to be. There's a censorship still occurs for sure. And just finding these articles today for this podcast illustrated that there's still progress to be made. But overall, there's more free speech. There's more sharing of ideas openly without censorship today, now in 2026, than there was in 2020 and 2010 and even 5 years ago. And the reason that's so important, I think, to end on that note is, years ago, Israel could probably commit, or another nation anywhere in the world could commit acts of atrocity against a group, or its settlers could commit acts of atrocity, and it might largely get swept under the rug by mainstream media, by the powers that be in the media, the gatekeepers, so to speak. And the internet was still kind of in an infancy stage compared to today, and the search engines were more rigged than ever, I think, in the beginning stages. And so it was really hard for information like this to spread. Today, it's a different ball game. People are able to communicate much more freely. They're able to search for things. They're able to find things. If they can't find it on Google, they do what I did, and they go to different websites, like in this case, alexjoneslive.com, and they can find some of the real stories. I'm not saying Alex Jones always gets it right, but they are alternative media. They're not the mainstream media. And so you're going to get a different narrative. And anyway, I think it's a good sign that the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a traditionally staunch supporter of Israel, is speaking out, even if he's just doing it to save his own ass, politically speaking. I don't care what the reason is. The fact that he's being forced to say it, or is choosing to say it, to call out when acts of terror are occurring, that's a good sign. And that's what I kind of hang my hat on when I think about the course of humanity today, and where we're going. Is, yes, there's more atrocities. There's still atrocities happening all over the world. There's still bad things happening all over the world. But the difference and the game changers, so to speak, is I'm able to have a podcast and bring this information to you. I'm able to look up this information, maybe not on Google or some of the more mainline AI engines, but generally speaking, I'm able to easily find, and you all are able to easily find, other sources of information. And it's forcing people like Mike Huckabee to change their tune and speak a little more truth and a little less deceit. So thanks for listening to my rant. Please share, comment, like, all that good stuff. Keep an open mind, keep your sanity. This is The Last Offense. You can find us obviously on YouTube, and continue to watch and support us. Thank you.